let's begin first of all perhaps by talking about what we know. Clive, if I may start with you. We do know that people are generally about the service that they get from the banks. Is this, the findings in this report, how much of it is a surprise for you?
Well, the findings in the report is very consonant with what I find in my office, so it's not much of a surprise to me.
Right. Any things that stood up for you?
Well, you know, there are two fundamental complaints in the survey, to my understanding. One is the charge that fees are too high, and secondly, the fact that customers want to be treated better.
Without the high machines and stuff.
Yes.
Of course, the machines we do know for the banks, it helps them reduce costs and help fatten their margins. But let me come to you, Thami. From where you sit, any surprises here?
No, I agree with Clive.
Yeah.
There are no real surprises here. This is a confirmation of what we've known for many years.
Right.
And most of the problems that were highlighted in this survey were also highlighted by the Jolly Commission way back in 2007, 2008.
Right.
We've had these problems for quite some time. The problem is that we're not addressing them, and this is affecting our consumers quite negatively. The other issue also that is important to point out is that most of these problems are happening because we don't have proper competition in the banking sector. We need to introduce proper competition so that consumers can have a real choice.
I'm actually going to throw this back at you two gentlemen, because you are the ones who are consumer advocates. You do adjudicate on consumer complaints, but in part, your role is to ensure that consumers are getting a fair deal. The fact that we've got this complaint on the high banking fees and the lack of proper service from the banks so many years after the first complaints were made suggests that perhaps your offices need to look at yourselves here. Can I begin with you, Thami? Okay. Are you failing?
Look, there are a few things that need to be done. One is financial education. I don't think we're doing enough. I'm talking about all stakeholders, government, consumer groups, Clive Pillay's office. We need to do more to make sure that consumers are able to manage their finances better. Two, I think we need to get back to the Jolly report and make sure that we implement the recommendations of that Jolly report. Right. If we don't implement those recommendations, we'll never be able to solve some of the problems that we're facing.
Are we unable to tackle the banks and make them do the recommendations, implement the recommendations that have been on the table for so long?
I think government has the capacity to tackle these issues. I think the problem is that
government has not
banks
done it. I'm finishing
a very powerful lobby group, and they're able to prevent government from taking action.
Clive, from your side?
Look, Godfrey, I'm not a consumer advocate. My office is an independent office. And my mandate is to adjudicate disputes between banks and their customers. And we do that independently, impartially, confidentially, and speedily. So that's my mandate.
Right. Given the number of complaints that keep coming to your office, then where does the fault lie? Because why should we keep on talking about the same things year in, year out?
Well, there are a number of factors that impact on what is perceived to be high bank charges.
Perceived?
Well,
you're choosing your words carefully.
Well, it's not always a minefield that a lot of consumers think.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, there are a number of factors that impact on bank fees and bank charges.
Right.
And it's the collective impact of all of those factors that tend to keep prices comparatively high.
Right. Again, when you compare against international peers.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about the other findings. One of the findings is that customers want to be spoken to in their local languages. Why is that such a problem for the banks?
No, I don't think that's a problem. I think all banks have, to a lesser or greater extent, the capacity to communicate with a consumer in a language of his or her choice. I don't think that's a major issue.
Thami?
It is a problem. For instance, if you look at the product information brochures or booklets that we get, most of it is so complicated that even a well-educated, well-learned person finds it very difficult to understand. Now, if you're talking to people who are financially illiterate, people who didn't go to school for many years, when they go to the bank to open accounts, to do transactions, They simply do not understand what is taking place. And as a result, they find themselves buying the wrong products, which means that they lose money in the long run. So the issue of the language is very important here.
And it's not being addressed in your
And
view?
it has not been addressed.
Adequately.
The issue of the language has been talking.
Is that across the board, or are we talking here specific banks that perhaps do not have products that do address
It is
people
across
in
the
their
board.
languages?
I'm afraid it is across the board, and it's something that the banks need to address if they really care about their customers. They want their customers to have a good experience when they visit banks.
Yeah, one of the surprises for me in terms of the findings was this line about why we have to bank. 52.5% said because it keeps my money safe and secure.
Yeah.
I was hoping that the figure would be higher,
Yeah.
number one. Number two, only 8% said they put money in the bank to keep control of their spending. That's frightening. And I think that comes to your office because you are supposed to be educating consumers.
Well, the problem right now is that most of us don't have a lot of cash to be able to control and manage properly.
Right.
Most of us are living from hand to mouth. And with all these increases that are coming as a result of e-tolling, new petrol prices, increasing food prices, I think the majority of consumers in this country are really battling. That is why the numbers of over-indebted consumers in this country is so high.
Yeah.
We're talking about more than 100,000 people who have applied to be part of the debt counseling program.
Right.
So this is a huge challenge that really needs us and government and other institutions like Clive Pillay to work together to try and address this problem.
Yeah. Clive, the issue of high-tech, the human touch, etc. issue, that's a difficult one to address, isn't it? Because banks do need to keep up with technological advances and, you know, bring the latest products into the market. But at the same time, the consumer does want someone to talk to them.
Yes, that's true. But it's somewhat of a contradiction.
Yeah.
If you want somebody to talk to you face to face,
Yeah.
in a building, in an office, there's an attendant.
It costs money.
That's exactly. There's an attendant cost to that. So you can't have that on the one hand and at the same time expect bank fees and bank charges to be low. It's not compatible.
Right. So how do we get around it? Is it his fault?
No, the
Because
problem...
then he needs to educate the consumer to understand that when the bank is
It's not our
directing
fault.
you, when the bank is directing you
problem-
to go to the ATM,
Yeah.
there's actually a very good reason for
Good.
them to do so.
Good. But you see, this problem affects mainly your very poor, poorly educated consumers who don't have access to the internet, who may not be able to use the cell phone for banking purposes.
Which
so
is where
they've
you
got
come
to
in.
go into the bank and say, I want to be helped inside the bank. The banks instead should be having products that are designed for the poor people so that we can encourage poor people to save more. The biggest challenge that we have in the country right now is that we're not saving, and that is not good for the economy of the country.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you were educating them, they would understand perhaps, I mean, surely it must be a simple thing to be able to go into town, put your card into the building, into the ATM, get your money out and you go, and the charge on you is less
Correct.
than if you want to go and talk to a person.
Well, the good thing is that
It's education.
the number of people using debit cards is now increasing because of the education. But we'll always have the problem of very, very poor consumers, especially in the countryside, still needing service inside the bank. I think the banks should be able to say, with poor people, let's charge less.
Final point, Clive.
Yes.
Given the fact that we've had this whole issue around fees, the 56% who say if there was one thing they would ask, they would ask Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan to ask the banks, it would be to cut fees. The figure seems low to me, given the fact that all of us are complaining about bank fees.
Yeah, you would have thought that the figure would have been considerably higher. So that seems to suggest to me that the level of dissatisfaction in the banking public is not as high as we are led to believe.
Can I change it and say
Maybe we
perhaps
feel
it's because...
disempowered as consumers
Do you
because
feel
this thing has
disempowered?
not been
I was going to
addressed for many
I was going to suggest that perhaps it's because the banks have listened and
Yeah.
therefore they've cut their fees and therefore people are happy about the banking fees. Let's give them
That I
credit.
doubt very much.
Thami will never concede that.
Time will never say that, just like a farmer will never say that, you know, it's been abandoned years here and we've got a good harvest. They'll always say, oh, there's one problem or the other. Clive Pillay, Ombudsman, and Thami Bolani, Chairman, National Consumer Forum, thank you for joining us.